yes, I'm a bit ahead of myself here with my testing. Just got some graphics up on the screen. I've got some things copying in the background. Should be kind of exciting. I guess I just need to get a game started. Alright. I think I've got a shortcut that way. It was there on the screen. Alright. So there is some focus to this video. It does serve a very good purpose. What we're actually doing is we're running Hogwarts Legacy on a hard drive. It's further testing of the last few days, where I've been moving the page file for Windows. I've been moving Hogwarts as a folder on the C drive, on other solid state drives. The C drive on this machine is probably an NVMe drive. I'm going to go with it's a fairly budget one. Probably doesn't have the cleverness of a few others. Alright, so what I noticed when I moved to the hard drive yesterday was that this game start took a very long time. Ridiculously long time. I've never seen it take such a long time. And bear with me. Oh, there we go. So, sort of that's what we're checking right now, is we're just doing what we could say is a long boot. And we're going to try the game out, see how it runs on a hard drive. Now, I've already got a pretty solid idea about this. I was testing it last night, and spoilers, thoroughly enjoyed the experience on a hard drive versus my regular drive. Now, some of the differences coming in on this screen, rather than peaking up at north of 500 frames a second for the first few seconds and then burning through it, it doesn't. It peaks up about 40. It tells me that the shaders it's first reading and compiling there are all very, very small files on the drive, and that's an area that solid state drives can really, they can jump around at different locations with no access time. Hard drives didn't have that benefit. They had to seek all over the disk. And so the solid state drive certainly just bursts through those raw frame rates at the start there quite quickly. You can see that there are absolute advantages for being able to get access to anywhere on the disk instantaneously. So what are the benefits of a hard drive? Okay, well, in this machine, it's no CPU utilization in order for the drive to work. So whilst the drive is a lot slower, because it's not hitting my CPU so much in order to load data from it, I'm seeing very different performance in the game when running. So my system might be different to your system. It might be that I'm using an older processor that is kind of closer to the limit of what the game might need. And so for myself, I've seen massive frame rate differences just having swapped up to a hard drive. And certainly my frame rate lows, my frame rate highs, everything seems to be significantly affected. Alright, so the big weakness though of the hard drive is just at the top of this hill here. There's a bridge leading to the clock tower at Hogwarts. And sorry, I don't actually play half a metre in front of the telly, it's all a bit big for me. Right, so here it's got to load a lot of data in. Right, I saw it glitch for a little second there. Typically on the hard drive, when I run here, I can get it to absolutely lock up. Now it's not doing that right now. That's a bit interesting. Yesterday when I played, that was the only weakness I could really have. Now, the reason why I've swapped over to a hard drive, it's all about reducing the microstutter. I find on the hard drive I don't get any microstutter that I get on all the solid state drives. And this video is an extension, continuing on from yesterday's video, where I was using the worst solid state drive on my machine, really old Intel one, probably doesn't read more than about 300 megabytes a second. Doesn't hit the CPU so hard, and you can say if it reads at half the speed of an old Samsung Evo drive, maybe the reason it doesn't hit the CPU so hard is it's not decompressing so much data. Right? It might be advantages to the Samsung drive. Well, I have been trying out a lot of different options. Things like choosing which solid state drive that isn't my NVMe drive might benefit as a page file, or just trying out all the different combinations, which is good. It's taught me a lot about the game, about how it optimizes itself, or how it actually works. Now it should just drop. Okay, so there for a brief moment. So I'm not sure what's going on there. This is where I keep alluding to the fact that the page file might be being used. And I ran 5 or 6 times at this little spot last night. And I'm very confident that when I do this little fly down the hill and do a little loop via the river, that it clears out from memory that clock tower zone, or that section of Hogwarts that was going to load up. Alright, so yes, my frame rate gets really bad running down through there. This is just a little test I do for, it shows me a few things. And for example, on the hard drive, when you run here, anytime there's a lot of data to load in, like all those trees in front, there's lots of potential little files that might be comprised, lots of little shaders or lots of little bits of graphic because of all the complex scenery in front of me. I notice on the hard drive, that's where I get frame rate lows, or I see a little bit of microstutter that I wasn't seeing on the drive prior to this. For example, when I fly, and I'm going to do it in just a moment, but I'll fly from the castle to Hogsmeade, and there's a bridge along the way where I just about always expect microstutter. Since the recent game update, as of mid last month, where the VRAM systems are used a lot less well, and yeah, okay, that there is not tripping up the sorting. It's actually kind of scary, right? This is an ancient hard drive. Now it is a 7200 RPM drive, but the data read speeds on a hard drive is very, very small compared to just about any SSD. And I'd kind of expected certain results this morning where everything works the way it was, and then I got that jank just on that bridge, and I was going to use that jank on the bridge as a reason why you wouldn't actually use a hard drive for gaming. The long load at the start isn't really an issue once your game's started, if you've got streaming assets and no loading screens in game. Okay, so look, it's the resilience of this hard drive that's quite amazing. So please don't judge my game performance as, oh, this is what a hard drive does, or here's someone who doesn't know what they're doing. It's true that what I've tuned my game to do might be different to how you tune your game, but academically speaking, what we're looking at here is how do the drives affect either my CPU, or how do the drives affect my frame rate, and does it changing a drive affect my microstutter rate? And that's really the reason why this video is going up. It's all about the microstutter. So if you just look at the screen for a second, indicating there that the second row down on the second column in there is a thing called microstutter. It says 0.0 at the moment. That there is really what we're looking at. So look, I must admit I've tuned this game to be about 30 frames a second as the lows. I then use a frame rate doubler to try and basically stick at 60 and achieve a V-sync lock. This is an older style television that isn't variable sync, so being able to run at 60 frames a second is kind of important to me. Anyone asking why would I run at a lowly 30 frames a second? Look, it was just gameplay testing when I first got the game showed me that my frame rate lows when running through what I found as a worst case scenario. Hang on, should be microstutter here. There was no microstutter at all. Okay, so what I noticed on the hard drive, different to all the solid state drives. Yep, when we get within distance there of that forest, there was a brief moment of microstutter there while it loaded ahead. Yeah, very, very interesting. So, my apologies there. I kind of forgot my train of thought. When I first got the game and I was tuning it to see what my lowest frame rates were going to be, I realised that when running through the courtyard in Hogsmeade, I was going to drop down to about 37 frames a second. And realising that my speed varying between 80 frames a second and or 100 and all the way down to 30 was going to be a jarring experience. Now just for a second, okay, microstutter there coming into Hogsmeade. Do expect that if you look at the GPU utilisation of memory down in the bottom corner, you'll see that it loads in and loads out a lot of data there. It just went from 12 gig to 15 gig and back down to 12 gig. And that was where we saw the judder. And that is consistent. Ever since they put out the patch at the end of last month, the VRAM utilisation has lowered. I find whenever there's a lot of data coming in and out of my VRAM is when I might see some microstutter. That's basically the only time. So this hard drive's not doing bad though. A lot of areas that lead to slowdown or jank on my... I mean, a Microstutter is slowed down, arguably, and I'm seeing jank. But this isn't too bad, knowing what I've tuned for. So getting back to my story, which is just off to the right there, and we're going to run back there again in about 15 seconds' time, is a courtyard in the middle of Hogsmeade. And I found my frame rate lows there were about 37. So then I proceeded, knowing that my frame rate lows were going to be that low, no matter what, I then proceeded to turn up all the graphics until I impacted that frame rate low. And I found I basically could turn everything to ultra. And my frame rate lows weren't really going to be affected because I was CPU bound in certain areas. And so I thought, well, I'd rather enjoy the game with all the pretty graphics turned on. And so your way of running the game might be a bit different to mine. You know, I've needlessly, arguably, turned on the ray tracing. I am running it at fairly high resolution. And that does create a situation where my system is really working hard to run. What I've noticed though is upon going to this hard drive, it's not a fantastically new hard drive. Probably picked it up second hand for $10 many years ago. Right, so it's nothing really special as hard drives go. But yeah, what I've noticed is that I'm not losing a little bit of CPU overhead to running a budget solid state drive. Right, so just a quick education. Budget solid state drives, where they save the money, is not putting an expensive CPU paired in with a little controller chip. And that controller chip does the compression and decompression of the drive data, so that what limited space you're willing to pay for, be it 50 gig or 100 gig, yeah, just made up numbers, I know they're not multiples of 8, but if you're willing to pay for 50 gig, but the manufacturer can give you 100 gig for the same amount of money, most consumers will take that. So what invariably happens is the manufacturers bring several product lines to market. For the people who are willing to pay top dollar and actually get true good quality solid state drive performance, they put a better controller chip in there and they give you about half as much storage for the same amount of space. Now it's true in artificial benchmarks or desktop productivity benchmarks, and a budget drive and a top tier drive might show similar performance. In fact, in some ways, for performance per watt metric, for example, a budget drive can look better than a lot of the pro drives. That's mostly because it doesn't have any inbuilt cache, or it's cheap. It doesn't have internal parts that are utilising the power or utilising hardware to actually help. And so that's what we notice, is that with the budget drives, they hit the CPU a little bit harder. And because of that, in games like this, where when my frame rates are limited by my CPU performance, anything using a bit more CPU performance might be affecting my frame rates. And so that's what I've absolutely found, is that going to this ancient budget hard drive, a lot of areas where I would have little frame rate jank have all gone away. Now I can see it, like just then you might have seen a single frame, there was a lighting update. It's a time of day transition that's just about to happen in the background, and whenever that happens, I actually see the Microstutter go up about 10 seconds before the time of day kicks in. And you can see it through the GPU memory utilization. You can see that the game world itself is trying to render out a bunch of graphics, move out a lot of no longer needed textures because they're pre-baked for lighting of a certain time of day, and it's got to load in new textures which have pre-baked lighting for a different time of day. And so yeah, when you see the GPU memory dumping out a lot of data, bringing in a lot of data, in the past that was affecting my frame rate. I didn't know that, right? And so, look, I had ideas. So what's basically happened, and what's prompted me to do a lot of this testing, as a techie that's been tweaking computers since the early 90s for extreme performance, with the change to this game software where it now clears out the video RAM really aggressively, the game streaming systems are now working overtime to try to keep data for the game world in front of the character constantly loading in and being there. And it's kind of overburdening everything. The whole game was built around certain size modules based on actual physical video RAM amounts that were on the market. They built a really good ultra texture set, a really good high texture set, and it would load people's machines very, very well. So anyone reading between the lines here, a potential solution in the short term might just be to knock your textures down one size setting. You might free up such that your video RAM can now stay on top of the actual game world and doesn't have to clear out so aggressively. Don't know. I don't know if that's a solution. I have a feeling it'll still clear out. Oh dear. But anyway, what I found is that for borderline systems like my own, simply moving around where my page file was, simply all of a sudden a game that had run flawlessly smoothly for a year and a half started running a bit like this, right? So that the really low frame rate there dropped right down. There was a moment when my video card was totally choked, right? There was so much data coming in. This lowly little hard drive moving data 1/5 as quick is like the worst solid state drive you're probably likely to go out and find right now. The older, well, I don't know about that, but the older hard drives aren't very performant. And the fact that this game actually runs better off a hard drive, right? So yeah, there are a few moments, right, it jerks down, right? It's trying to move 3 or 4 gig of data, and I can't feed that in a second off this ancient old hard drive. And those moments might lead to a little bit of jerkiness, like we saw a moment ago. But for all the moments that aren't that, right, the game runs just beautifully. And the fact that I can fly here over the bridge. So a couple of days ago I changed to using an external SSD, and there'd be Microstutter over this bridge or before it. Okay, there it was, but it was a little bit after it, which... Anyway, I just noticed that this hard drive is holding its own against a lot of SSDs. For me, it's been better performance. So the purpose of this video isn't to say I'll go install the game on an old hard drive. Just like my previous videos where I'm trying to educate. I'm just trying to say, look, maybe consider, right? So if you've got a laptop, you feel you've only got one drive, and at the moment that drive is your page file, it's your game. I just think you'll find that, especially on a lot of budget laptops, one of the things I've noticed as a techie who gives purchasing advice, I've assisted people to buy what we consider the most entry-level laptop we can find. And it isn't the most entry-level price point. It's what I consider the most entry-level price point for reliable hardware, because reliability is the number one metric for myself. Downtime is just not worth it. Warranty isn't worth it. You can't afford just the stress at the end of the day. We just don't need it. We need reliable products. So I educate and encourage people to go that path. And what I found with a few laptops in later years is that they claim a solid state drive, and it's like, no man, this is what we used to call eMMC memory. This is like an SD card kind of thing, you know. The write speeds will be atrocious, but the read speeds will be good enough. And so installing Office updates when you first get the thing, you know, have 4 hours aside. Don't expect to be using it that day. But once it's installed Office at its atrocious write speeds that they usually pick up, and they're quite okay. But it comes back to what I was saying about at a desktop productivity level, you've usually got CPU power to burn, and even the most budget of drives, leaning on the CPU a bit doesn't affect the average user, not one iota. Right? We don't notice an extra couple of watts or a couple of cents of electricity bill extra over many, many months of use. Right? It's nothing significant. Right, so the massive frame rate drop here is just my card trying to get on top of getting the data in for the world beyond this bridge, and that's where the frame rate has just absolutely bombed down. So look, at this point, it might just be just a little bit academically. I mean, I don't need to do this. I'll, if you bear with me, it'll probably take me 2 minutes to get back to a thread of talking about something useful. Okay, I'm just going to get sidetracked doing a little bit of techie stuff. What I might do is we'll just see if we can move this game over to an external solid state drive and boot from that. Right, so just trying to keep it fun. I had actually hoped to make this a second video after this one, where I just got got all this done, and then was hopefully going to be able to just continue on. So look, at the moment I've got it on a hard drive. All right, I'd like to move it to now, when I estimated earlier today how long this was going to take and if it would be viable to do it on camera, I was doing test runs off my C drive where obviously the read speed was 300 megasecond or something. You don't have is that coming from a hard drive? I'm going to estimate about 180 megabytes a second. So we'll just come down. So the read speed, oh no, it wasn't on that. Okay. So yeah, this is the drive it's coming from, and its read speed is limited to about 140 megaseconds. So I know from testing earlier, the write speed on this drive will happily go up to 330 sustained, maybe a bit more, and that seems to be after the cache runs out, it manages to sustain that. I mean, that's not too bad. So I was estimating, based on 80 megabytes a second, how long it was going to take. So 50% faster than that, it's viable for this little blue bar to get to the end and for me to hit start. So I'll continue this video. Some people, the 2 watchers of it, if I'd stopped watching 10 minutes ago, that's fine. But let's have a look now at an external solid-state drive, because certainly for laptop users, this is quite viable. And I've got 3 or 4 little external units here, and I've gone through and just checked to find the pro ones, right? So even amongst the verbatim line, I think they literally call it VX 1000 was the pro, VX 500 was like the consumer variant. Followed all the standard rules of about twice the price for the same size. So it just gave me the belief that there was going to be a better controller chip with this one. The fact that it kind of referred to itself as a SCSI disk drive, it's like, oh yeah, it sounds like it's trying to seriously be an external drive. But I mean, I've got some Samsung T7s and things. I've got a few drives here, and from what testing I could do this morning, there was definitely a CPU hit when moving data to them, and it was a little bit hard to measure, because if I couldn't feed them, if I was only feeding it 100 megasecond, you don't expect there to be too much of a CPU hit, only working with compression or decompression of 100 megabytes versus compression or decompression of 500 megabytes. But in the last few days of testing, I could certainly see that the internal solid-state drives, some of the budget ones, older Intel drives and whatnot, things like, there we go, Gen 4, I think, what's that, a 660 maybe, I don't know. Yeah, some of these drives are, they're more budget than I thought. I actually did replace them at one point. I bought, a replacement for $90. Remember, I'm just doing everything on the budget, for like second-hand stuff, as it turns up, in my local market, going and meeting people down at the local train station type thing. And yeah, for $90, I bought a new M2 Intel drive, which I was going to make my C drive, but it ended up getting left at a friend's house because he had 2 M2 slots on his main board. He needed an upgrade, and his main drive was a budget one, and we knew that a little bit more of a better controller chip would alleviate some of his CPU, and his CPU was just borderline too low for the games he was playing, things like Hunt Showdown. And then he was in the fiasco of the NVIDIA driver scenario, with a little bit more overhead for running NVIDIA drivers than, say, AMD cards require. And that's neither here nor there when you're an internet reviewer and buying 4090s and running the best CPUs. But as average users who try to get by on the bare minimal CPU and try to get the absolute best graphics card they can get, having just a little bit of CPU overhead lost because your video card drivers demand it. If your CPU is just on the borderline of being able to do the game, then your frame rates will be lower. And it does lead to situations where things that 2 cards that might benchmark the same across everybody else's machines, and in a particular person's setup where their CPU is a bit lower or just a bit borderline for the game, that the AMD card might spit out 30% or 40% more frame rates. And I mean, I've seen plot graph data showing like a mid-level AMD card equaling a flagship NVIDIA card on a given person's machine, simply because their CPU is holding back the really good top-of-the-line NVIDIA card. So, does CPU cycles and losing them to peripherals matter? Yeah, it can. Might not to you. It probably doesn't. If you don't need this video, right, this is not your video, it probably doesn't matter to you. But for people out there that have been experiencing issues, certainly recently, after the game changed the way it works, and all of a sudden these streaming subsystems are just burdened, yeah, it probably does make a difference. And I ran the game for 1.5 years on the most budget solid-state drive with CPU overhead, a Samsung 850 Evo. The game ran fine. And then after the recent patch, I started noticing low-res textures in the game world, and I started getting little hiccups on area transitions. My microstutter had gone up. And by moving my page file, I was able to get on top of it to to a certain extent. I then put the game on the M2 drive, the main system disk. I tried so many different combinations. And what I could clearly see was that on borderline systems, that the drive overhead, or the performance of a drive, could easily affect this game in its current working state. And that's the context, is we need to understand that the game was given a hotfix patch. It's now using less VRAM. If it gets another hotfix patch and reverses the situation and the game goes back to using the full amount of VRAM, that all these borderline cases that are currently experiencing problems, they'll all just go away. All the issues will just disappear. But so I did a video yesterday. It showed mild amounts of microstutter constantly. The video was about dealing with microstutter, and I just noticed anywhere where there was data loading, there were still areas that I thought, oh, maybe I can get on top of that. And so just academically last night, I thought, oh yeah, I'll move the game to a hard drive. There'll be no CPU overhead, and I'll see how it runs. And enjoyed the really long startup time, waiting for it to begin. And then when the game finally came up, it was so good. And the missus and we ran around Hogwarts for hours, and she couldn't believe how good it was. We could see that clearly little areas that we'd been borderline with frame rate, and just all little niggles that we had been having just dropped right off. And the best thing though was the basically zero microstutter, and just flying all around the map. And it's like, yeah, okay, there was 12 spots of microstutter and flying all around the map, and each of those corresponded with map transition areas. And with the exception of 2 or 3 of those instances, the microstutter was generally less than 6%, and it was less than 3 frames. Or at least that's what, by polling in a vil of looking at, inspecting the information, it would only flick up microstutter like 1.5%, 1.2%, 3%, and then just gone, you know. And a lot quicker than I just described it there, I guess. But the point was that over hours of flying around, it was just about perfect. And it felt like the game we'd had for that first year and a half, and that the solution was like a crappy old external a crappy hard drive. At which point it got me believing that a lot of laptop users using an external drive, be it a hard drive in an enclosure, or as we're about to test, a middle of the line SSD that you can walk into any office supply shops and buy some external storage that you generally only buy to back up your photos to or something. And we're just going to test it now to run a program off. We'll see how it goes. But look, I have tried to correlate how much of a CPU hit these USB drives had. And instead of the internal SSDs generally loading up 8 cores, the budget ones, without the really good controller chips, I noticed they would use up to 8 cores. Depending on the file size data that was being read or written, I could see performance vary between effectively 1 entire core of my CPU, spanning all the way up to 2 entire cores of my CPU. And that's at 4.5 gigahertz. It is an older Intel chipset, but I did find that a little bit concerning. I could see how much the hit was. It was big enough that if we could find the right external drive with, and as I noticed when checking these drives this morning, it seemed like my CPU was only being hit across 2 cores a little bit. Like it was a noticeably different impact. And instead of spreading it out over so many, it was, anyway, I'm kind of excited. Of course, Steam, I often find that at this point I'm best just to log out as a user and log back in again, just about. Maddening. So anyway, some elephants in the room. When I was running before, anyone looking at my hotspot temps probably noticed they went up fairly hot. The reason for that is I'm currently in the process of tuning down the fan speeds on the video card so that I can run this game for hours and hours and hours without it being audible. So I kind of felt like I was there the other day, just about. That will have taken out my Switch controller, probably. Dang nabbit. Didn't think about that. We'll see. So Oh, let's see how much quicker this loads. This should be exciting. It was definitely a slow load off the hard drive. Alright, so yeah, look, the idea here is that we're going to not get the jank beside the bridge approaching the clock tower. There should be enough data rate. So I did have to check the USB slots on the computer. The first cable I was using, actually, same USB slot but wrong cable, limited my data rate to about 40 megabytes a second. And just changing the cable to one with the appropriate colour, I guess you could say, on the inside of the plug, something that was blue that suggested it might be USB 3. Looked like it was a bit better built in terms of thickness or gauge of the cable. I guess there's a way to judge that. It was, all of a sudden I was getting 300-400 meg or 500 meg, the speeds that I should have been getting on the drive, or better speeds. But I mean, please, anyone recognise that this is a 10-year-old CPU. The motherboard might have been one of the first variations that was starting to come to market with USB 3 or USB-C, arguably eventually. I don't have any USB-C ports, but I've got the USB 3 slots. I think I've got 2 of them, different controller chips for each of them. Slightly, it might be I get better performance on one. I think in order to actually use the USB 3 speeds, I have to run some extra software, and then I can turn on a certain mode, and it allows 3.1 or something USB. But look, I must admit I don't muck around with any of that. This is purely academic, just from the point of view of will the bridge be better, right? And basically what it's coming down to is I could see frame rate lows before any big forests. So off the hard drive, wherever it had to load lots of little files, hard drive's biggest weakness, and I hadn't defragged that drive, and I'd moved a bunch of software off it and then just copied Hogwarts on and just had it fill up any gaps that were left in the drive. So in terms of contigual or linear reading performance, which is where a hard drive gets a bit quicker, as if it doesn't have to keep moving the seek heads, it can just stick reading one area. They have a chance at reading well, and I didn't set up the hard drive to operate well at all, but I noticed that when I was playing the game, any area where there was a lot of data, that might have been a lot of small files, i.e. skirting a forest, was where the frame rate on my computer might be 5 or 10 frames down. And so I definitely felt that the hard drive was causing me some limits, but basically the only visual one was approaching the bridge here, just seeing a little hiccup. So what we're trying to see now is, can we get rid of the hiccup approaching this bridge here, which is, okay, so that was arguably less, and that was quite noticeably less, and the time it took to bounce back in frame rate when I turned around directions was quicker. So yeah, look, definitely this external solid state drive seems to be running better than any of the internals that I'm using, because they're so budget and lean so heavily on the CPU. Anyway, I'll fly off to Hogsmeade in a second. We'll see that. I also run via the castle. I like to run in and out of a room and just see how quick it clears off the data. Look, I missed a little bit of my standard check there. Okay, the frame rate there, loading in the lots of files. I didn't lean to the jank. I didn't see the microstutter. So actually, when I was running off the hard drive, I saw microstutter in areas where I'd never seen it before. But it was always where the area just next, the next area it was trying to load in had lots. I can only guess what must have been little files. And you saw the difference. So yeah, look, it's bouncing back pretty good. It might be a little from column A, a little from column B with regards to going easy on my CPU, because it's physically can't move as much data as quick over the USB-C. It might be that my CPU has a little bit of an easier time. It doesn't have to decompress such vast amounts of data so quickly. So it might be that my CPU is actually technically able to run a bit quicker using an external drive in ways that other people's CPUs might not. Okay, all I'm trying to say here is, as a techie, I'm reserved about a few of these observations I'm seeing. I just like, more testing might be needed to absolutely be confident in some of the things here I'm saying. But I know this rig well enough to know I know what my frame rates in any given area should be, and you can always say, there's time of day differences and whatnot that will affect run-to-run runs. It's like, yeah, but I've done these runs so many times. I'm also kind of aware of the different weather systems and what the low frame rates will be in any given zone at any given time. This here is, and I can feel in the zippiness and responsiveness, this is actually not feeling like it's got a CPU overhead. Anytime there's a CPU overhead that run up to this room, it tries to load it before you get here, and I can actually feel the frame rate on the stairs outside drop right off. I didn't do that. Okay, so as you can see, it about parity there to the hard drive, right? So the hard drive with its half read speeds was still able to get the game world data roughly as quick there. A lot of the times you feel it's just reassembling data, it's potentially already loaded. From what testing I could do, the game definitely looks like it's using a page file and using the system page file, but you know, maybe that's just anecdotal stuff I saw when looking at CPU overheads, and maybe moving my page file off my system disk took away a little bit of CPU overhead, and maybe that extra CPU overhead gave me a better overall frame rate. Don't know, but for me it's all about the microstutter. So we've got a horrible weather time of day here, and we're getting no microstutter there. Okay, so what I'm expecting is it to be a little bit better around about now, where it's distant to that distant forest. Okay, so you can see it still had to think about it for a brief moment. There was that microstutter jank, and yeah, those moments, I never had any of those, right? For the year and a half, just like everybody else, when the game ran the way it should and all the streaming systems worked and the VRAM would load up correctly, a lot of these issues just didn't exist, right? So it's going to take a little bit of a shortcut up to Hogsmeade here. Right, noticing that it's got the standard little bits of data loading at a distance, but we'll find out now. So we run into Hogsmeade. How is that first 10 steps into the village going to go? And then we'll do that lap around town and we'll see how it goes. Right, so there was a bit of microstutter, but not enough. Oh, there we go. I was going to say to really affect the frame rate. So at the moment, if I was to hierarchically rate the drives in my machine, this external SSD that can be had for about $100 at your local office supply store, and that was, that was years ago, right? I think I've had this thing for quite a few years now, and there'd be better ones, probably better price points. But yeah, as an upgrade, very easy to install, very easy to do. The differences made to this game, my lower frame rates are better, my upper frame rates are better. The jank in the game is less, and the brief moments where it was locking up for whole seconds or dropping down to stupidly low frame rates, that stuff's all basically gone. Now we are still testing this versus the hard drive. This is still the same video, but we can see that there is a little bit more CPU overhead with using this USB-C external drive. I can see it, but not enough that's really impacting my frame rate. What I do notice is that where the hard drive didn't quite have the burst speeds, this solid state drive definitely does. And so where there was a little bit of microstutter on the hard drive, at spots where it was really trying to get on top of a lot of data, this extra speed that an external solid state drive has is quite nice. But yeah, look, the solid state drives in my machine, budget ones, really hit the CPU hard. The worst, so working my way up, worst way to run the game, page file and game on the system disk, and that's with a NVMe drive, right? So that drive may or may not be equal in quality to a lot of people out there on budget laptops. So certainly something that is worthy of consideration based on my investigations. I would say that once I moved the page file onto a different disk, game got much better. Once I moved the page file and the game onto disks that weren't the system disk, game was better again. When I put the page file on the faster SSD and the game on the slower SSD, was better than the game on the faster SSD and the page file on the slower SSD. Now that there might be specific to me, and that might require more investigation. I was talking about that a moment ago. It might just come down to the faster speeds might give my machine more data to have to compress or decompress. That might be hitting my CPU a bit harder, and that might be leading to results that aren't plotting in a way that I'm tabling quite correctly. So look, maybe just more testing needed, or any given user needs to check whether the game and your page file on their respective drives, which drive has the better performance. For me, as I say, the page file being my better performant drive, and the game on the worst solid state drive in my machine gave me the best performance that this machine was going to give using those situations. Now, then the next improvement I found was putting the game on a crappy hard drive was better than any of those situations. That being said, it came with a couple of caveats. So on the crappy hard drive, there were some serious chunks where, for example, the bridge leading to the clock tower near the castle, that on the hard drive would lead to 6 or 8 second low frame rates. Now today I didn't get any, and this is, I'm going to put this in maybe evidence of the page file being used to save this game. Because yeah, the way this game was running last night, and I ran past like 8 or 9 times doing loops to keep hitting that bridge, and at no point did it get on top of it, at no point did it feel like it was caching it, it didn't in any way seem to speed up or get better. And then I turn it on today and it just acts like, oh yeah, that's not a problem, and it never has been a problem, right? So I don't know why there's a complete difference today, but yesterday everything I saw lined up with the way it should have behaved. This morning when I was running off the hard drive, it can only work that way if the page file was lifting the need to access a lot of those small files that the hard drive just doesn't. It's not physically possible for it to feed them up, for it to spit them out. So, you know, maybe if you want to argue academically that Windows isn't using page file, this game is in use, well, how do you know? Windows likes to hide all that data. But look, if it isn't, then this game must just be creating a folder in its own directory and then using its temporary cache of its own in that. Like, I don't know, maybe. But no, I've tested against that. That's not true. I'm just talking crap. By moving the game location, moving my page file, I've seen very, very different performance situations with how the game works. So, look, you may wish to look at where you install the game. I've found that using, as we're seeing right now, an external crappy SSD, right, and this is on a desktop machine with the ability to plug in good M2 drives or NVMe drives, we can see, well, certainly it doesn't show today comparing one video to the other, but if anyone looks at my videos from 3 days ago, 5 days ago, the amount of microstutter in the game was huge. The only thing I've done to change that is where the game is installed, by getting my game off my C drive and moving my page file off my C drive. The microstutter amounts became so infrequent and the size of them basically not being double digits, which is the real benefit. You know, and I'd only get them at moments where the game was going to be loading in a zone ahead of it, and it would only be for like a frame or two. Whereas 2-3 days ago, with my game on my main drive, with my page file, the microstutter was constant. It was like every other frame. If I was moving anywhere in the game, it was like just about every other frame was microstutter, and large amounts, double digits. So, look, the reason why I've been doing a lot of moving in the background and neating everything up and getting my C drive clean is I'm about to put in a FireCuda NVMe, a really fast drive. We're now going to go the other way. It's part of testing. You've got to try it all the extremes. We've tried out all the worst. We've tried all the things that are just horrible, and we don't expect the game to work very well, and found incredible results. You know, the things that we expected to be the worst actually turned out to be really good. For example, game on a hard drive. I have no doubt that some people out there with laptops can plug in an external hard drive or an external solid state drive and get really much better frame rate, much better frame rate lows, much better frame rate highs, lose a lot of the jank in their game. So that's definitely worth considering, definitely worth toying with and playing with. But for those of us that have interest to find out what happens when I go to a FireCuda, of course, the first thing I'll be doing is putting my page file and the game and Windows all on one drive and running it and expecting frame rates, you know, equal to my best, and certainly no CPU overhead and none of the little niggles that might happen right before loading certain areas. It'd be nice to see how quick doors in and out of these rooms load when I come back to them, because the game never used to clear VRAM so heavily. You used to be able to run back and go straight through any door you'd just gone through. But look, I can't believe how good this is. As a gamer, through the decades, I don't usually consider using an external drive. You know, I've got laptops with eSATA, and I boot OSs off eSATA ports quite happily. And you know, I understand the buses have been getting better over the years, but yeah, it feels a bit weird on my desktop PC to be firing up a game that requires a lot from people's rigs and running it on on a budget external drive, which I mean I bought it because it was the price of a thumb drive at the time. That was the only reason. It was on clearance at the local Office Workshop, but it was half the price of what it normally sold for, and it looked like they mispriced it and they were selling the Pro models at the price of the budget Evo models, and so I bought in. But yeah, look, the frame rate jank on this screen here wasn't bad like the hard drive could allow. But that being said, I'm kind of of the belief that the page file seems to be onto that spot now, and it's not going to let it load up poorly. Let's hit these buttons right. So, yeah, look, maybe I've had a couple of coffees. I need to go and review my data here, look at my frame rates, and try to make some assessments based on what I'm seeing. But look, it really does look to be a pretty big win for an external USB solid state drive for being able to